Welcome, dear listeners, to a much-belated Friday night featuring a story from a drifter, a man with no cause other than to make it home safely for the previous Christmas season, but found his journey to intersect with the ever-unpredictable, ever-present realm of Croatoan County. So to the night shifters, the tale-turners, the lifeless listeners, let us give heed to this man's example and learn when it's time to learn what we live for. For surely one day we all must develop a reason for living, just hopefully not at the same opportunity. On one snowy Nevada night a couple of weeks back, at a bar and grill more shack than establishment, near the man-made ziggurats guarding the Round Mountain open-pit gold mine, I sat, buzzed and a half, finishing my beer and looking up at the corner TV's advertisements in hopeful anticipation of a lukewarm rerun of A Christmas Story. I had no expectations other than to return to my motel room that night, run the hot water, and bathe in the luxury of recollecting missed opportunities till I passed out. That was until the door behind me opened with the characteristic scrape of settling lean-to craftsmanship. A chill passed the already lukewarm room till the door shut, and the heavy footfalls of thick steel-toed boots clomped across the weak wooden floor. A large native man, greasy ropes of thick black hair partially covering a scarred, wind-cracked face, leaned against the bar, now bowing under his weight. In a deep voice, carrying more than the exhaustion of a long day's labor, he raised 2 fingers and muttered, "Double my regular." There was a glassy distance in his eyes and a clench to his jaw, the first signs of a man preoccupied with something he couldn't get off his mind. The bartender hiccuped the attempt of a chuckle and said in a cigarette-burned voice, "Your regular is a double." The scarred face opened his wingspan, replying, "Then get me 2 doubles. I need to loosen up a little." Sensing my opportunity to strike up a conversation on an otherwise dead evening, I prodded. "What's the special occasion?" He continued looking at the bartender, only acknowledging my presence with his words. "What's it to you?" I was annoyed. I may not have been as large as him, but working warehouses for a living doesn't make you soft. Even animals have pride, and not being looked at piqued the grit within me. However, in most towns like these, a person's first instinct is to wonder how those around them are looking to profit. So, making a lukewarm starter was, in reality, the way to raise one's defenses, not lower them. So I stowed my dignity and opened myself to the possibility of further ridicule. "It's not anything to me. I've just been drinking for the past half hour and have nothing to look at except, well, the missing persons posters and the class action lawsuits." Out of the corner of my eyes, now trained on the TV, I saw his head scan mine for deception. After finding me to be what I was, open to some talk, he checked around us. I could only assume it was to reassure himself that he was where he was, at an empty bar in the middle of nowhere. The bartender arrived with a short glass, filled it with 4 shots of bourbon, and left the bottle on his side of the counter before returning to the glow of his charger-bound phone about 20 feet away. The native cocked his head, raised his glass, muttered, "I guess I do need to get it off my chest," then gulped the poison like it was juice. A satisfied smile broke the lateral lines of his face. His entire countenance exponentially changed from that of a hardened blue collar to an entertainer putting on a show. It was especially obvious at his first act. He made a long lean over the bar to check that our host was still on his phone before he looked at me, put a hushed finger to his lips, then quietly poured a liberal portion into his and mine glasses. Intrigued by his initiation of our now shared criminality, I raised my glass, he matched my salute, and we downed our respective rancid mixes together. Not looking up from his phone, the bartender hoarsely shouted, "You are paying for that." Our deception had been noticed, yet the effect remained the same. Our barriers dropped and we dispensed with the trivial introductions in short order. I asked, "Name?" He looked to a line of bottles on the wall and said with a grin, "Jack, yours?" "Kalula." We laughed at that. I continued, "What do you do?" "I'm an excavator for the mine. You?" "I'm unemployed." He asked, "Where are you from?" "Nowhere really, but making my way towards family in Texas." "You?" "Eli's where my family is, but the work is better here. I'd like to go home for Christmas, though." I asked, "Big family?" "Oh yeah, me too." Jack sipped quietly, then declared, "Aspirations? You must have some." I try to stay away from them, though I suppose I'll start settling down. I need to do something with my life." At this, Jack looked down at his swirling drink and thought a bit. Noticing some hesitation in his silence, I asked, "You?" "Oh yeah, probably a new barn for the horses. I try to keep my goals simple." "Yours?" To start settling down." Right. Jack nodded and grabbed some pub mix from a plastic bowl. He asked through a half-crunching mouth, "Any hobbies?" "You're looking at it." He faked a laugh. "Same here, though I do like to do a bit of hiking, and as of late, I suppose, telling stories." "What a coincidence. I like listening to stories. What made you start telling them all of a sudden?" Jack's eyes met the bartender's, whose head raised from his phone for the first time since he brought the bottle over. Their brief look broke with the bartender walking to the restroom and Jack pointing his thumb to a dimly lit table in the corner of the room. He grabbed the bottle and said, "This isn't something to be told in the company of more than one person. It doesn't have the same impact." After finding privacy in a place already lacking publicity, Jack lowered his voice, leaning in while pouring more bourbon for us. "Get ready for a doozy, because this one is true. It will change your life if you hear it. In fact, anyone who hears this tale sees the same spirit approach them afterwards. It's a newish one, too." Expecting his story to be freshly spun, I exhaled sharply and asked bluntly, "So the spirit will find me after I hear this, and it's a recently made-up story?" He shook his head. "Not made up. I saw her with my own eyes in this very valley. The story and the spirit. It was strange, but thankfully I had friends nearby to stop me from following it." Discarding the female spirit aspect as the story's hook, I asked, "So what makes it new?" Frustrated, Jack responded, "What makes anything new? She wasn't here before, but now she is, and she roams these lands looking to lure those away. Probably the only way to let her disappear is to never tell her story." Our engagement was paused by the return of the bartender, who promptly raised the volume to the introduction of John Shepard narrating his childhood home of Cleveland Street, Ohio. Not drowning out our talk, but enough to prevent his overhearing us. I adjusted my own volume and scooted further into the corner, continuing my inquiry. "So if you believe, then why do you want to tell me? We could let it disappear by talking about something else." Jack sighed in a bout of honesty I mistook for creativity. He admitted, "After it's told, you can't not tell it to someone else. It's like a disease that builds until you have to get it out, so I'd rather it be you than my family. Plus, I know you want to know." I still didn't think he was telling the truth, but he was right about one thing. I wanted to know. My boredom had brought me to the threshold of trouble many times before, and my curiosity prevented me from leaving. Not waiting for my response, his voice took on deeper tones, as a shaman would when embodying the energies of higher powers. A muted, throbbing muffled my ears, yet the scene he described became more alive the less I could comprehend his words. His shoulders dropped, his head arced forward, and a glow of something sinister bubbled in his irises. Themes of chanting ritual, undergirded by the recital of memorized elements, transferred their soft, searing words into my mind. No comfort can compare to those psychosomatic reverberations soothing my eardrums. I knew I was still sitting in that corner of the bar, yet I felt my spirit lift and my vision vertigo. My mind flew, and as I was whisked away, I could feel a patient presence slip in. However, the implications seemed so distant and unimportant compared to the novelty of my altered state and where I was landing. My conscious presence had arrived in a faraway realm of star-speckled dark green skies above a purple sandbar surrounded by sulfuric oceans of gas. From the sea, occasional plumes popped in vibrant tufts from storming colors incomprehensible to my human range of vision. From my omniscient perspective, 6 entities of differing and nucleic shapes defied gravity in patient conversation. Their language consisted of their gelatinous forms projecting glyphs at the ends of geometric nodes, all connected by strands of helical musculature. Their sight should have disturbed me, yet in my altered perception of them, I found my sentiment redirected to admiration. They never spoke over one another, never broke into displays of emotion. There was order to their mission, yet I couldn't understand what that mission was. Upon that nagging mystery, I'd found myself grow obsessed. They were obviously beings of rational sentience, so there had to be a reason for floating above unending clouds of gas on their small strip of land. After several moments, their glyphs paused. They collectively turned toward the edge in front of them. From the deep of swirling gases crawled a hard, chitinous creature. It passed beneath the 6 entities and took position behind them. Trailing the creature were 6 more of its kind, struggling to keep up with their leader. Confused by the altitude of their surroundings, so absent of their atmosphere, the creatures entered a sluggish state of torpor. Then at the sight of the 6 entities, they bristled in surprise. Their strained, aggressive hisses bore no intimidation for the entities, who promptly descended upon them. The beings each latched onto their own creature, dragging their panicked skitterings inland till the lack of life-sustaining elements caused them to pass out. At the entities' sticky contact, their weakest parts swelled from a building difference in pressure. The cartilage joints between its hardened plates bulged outward in pockets of micro-fissures. Boiling squeals of hot air escaped like steam from a kettle. The micro-fissures gradually widened to cracks until, eventually, the creature's internal contents sprayed from its joints, draping the sands in wet clumps of viscera. At the creature's ebulismic expiration, the floating entity's structures loosened. Their semi-translucent forms morphed into snaking tubes that one by one slid themselves into the now empty chitin armor. The 7 of them stretched, contracted, reformed into perfect copies. Once comfortable, they gathered a second time, then descended down, venturing from their sandy mountaintop into the gaseous ocean of unknown depths. All that was left were piles of gore, the twinkling of stars, and an endless horizon of brilliant chemical reactions. At the story's conclusion, the vision ended, and my mind returned to its position before my drunk storyteller. The glow from his eyes had faded, and his shoulders returned to their normal posture. It was as though, through having passed the metaphysical experience on to me, as a person would after having passed any other fluid or mass from a painfully swollen organ, that he had found unrepentant relief. I, however, now felt uncomfortable. Someone had sat in my chair, eaten my porridge, and now laid in my bed. An uninvited anxiety gripped between the folds of my brain, repetitiously scratching its grimy nails along the walls of my cranium. The intensity started small, and grew with the bouncing of my knee and the tapping of my finger against the table. I had to divert my attention. I needed an answer, not on the subject of my psychotropic experience. That was the furthest question from my mind. "I felt the same way," Jack said after observing my vacant stare and grinding teeth. His tone seemed almost sorry, but not enough to risk reflecting on the curse he gave me. I folded my arms and clenched my jaw, not sure why he should pity me. "In what way?" "The way you feel now, like you have the most important appointment of your life, but you don't know when, where, or why." My eyes met his in a tense silence. Eventually, I gave up and buried my head in my hands. The experience continued to saturate with residual vertigo, my spatial awareness tunneling as my head felt heavier. In concert with this physical dilemma, I began to recall the scene with increasing clarity, robbing my mind of focus on any other topic. The mask of reason, the stunning brutality, the shifting of form, the beauty of a radically different environment. While I stewed in compulsive contemplation, Jack took the nearly empty bottle back to the scowling bartender. Then, after some trading of hushed, angry words, he stopped by me on his way out. "Look, I really should be saying thank you. Usually when I get the urge, I talk to some jerk, but you seem like a nice guy. Just know it's nothing personal. Now I can go back to my family knowing I won't accidentally tell one of them. So, I suppose a word of advice: find something important and hold on to it. You can't get lost if you don't let go." Patting my shoulder, he added, "If you don't have a reason to live, you should probably find one, or don't. I don't remember much from my meeting with her, but it could have been heaven." Then, without another word, he ducked through the door, leaving a pervading chill in his wake. I decided it would be better to pay my tab and retire to my eagerly awaited motel tub. All I wanted was introspection of these captivatingly new thoughts and the relief of some warmth in my cold bones. As I walked to the bartender, he raised a hand. "Jack paid for your drinks as well." Perceiving my dull state, he said with some regret, "I'm sorry, you're obviously under the spell. Just remember to refuse her and walk away. It'll be difficult, but when I thought about my bar, I wanted to hold on to it more than anything she was offering, that's for sure. For you, though, there's no telling what'll happen. You'll probably be one of those drifters that goes missing, with no one to trace your disappearance or care. If you're lucky, you'll get one of those wanted posters." He pointed to the board of happy photos, all from caring families who wanted to know what happened to their wayward son or daughter. You could tell it from the fact that they were always posed with a smile. No family member would send a photo that made their child look like they somehow deserved going missing. If I was just drunk and not under whatever spell he claimed I was under, I would have yelled at him for making such a morbid claim. Instead, I shrugged, thanked him for the drinks, and walked into the wind-swept cold of Round Mountain's valley. Its undeveloped plain stretched south, a continual variation of wild grass tufts, lifeless cracks of rabbit brush, and withered husks of sagebrush. I stood there for a moment, admiring the dark gradient of clouded skies and snowy peaks, walling my vision south till they vanished on the horizon. There was a safe disconnection here, so far from the lights of any major populations. When I looked back to the streets winding north of me, not a single porch was lit, just the lamp above me, the occasional street corner, and the lamps of the other establishments that could afford it. The city wasn't much more than a dark circular spot of dirt plot suburbia. It supplied roofs for the mine workers, and that's really all it did. I could have walked the couple of blocks back to my motel. I wanted to. After all, I had my tub waiting for me. Yet, I felt a presence in the whistling gusts, and a reverence for the tracks of untamed wilderness I stood at the threshold of. I knew there had to be roaming herds, packs of predators, and every natural unknown about in their nightly cycles, skirting this minuscule human settlement in the middle of it all. It was in this awe that I felt lonely, and it was in that lonesome feeling that I became aware I was being watched. My first indicator was a sweet fragrance, not passing on the wind, but swimming its way upstream, unbothered by the meteorological forces now raining icy pellets. The scent was familiar. It accepted me, wanted me. I searched for its source, and in my search, I felt a maternal presence hidden at the edge of my vision. My eyes scanned from left to right till I found the dark shape, standing frighteningly still. A figure that was one gradient lighter than the mountains flanking it at the center of the valley and my vision. The figure I had been looking for, the one I had been waiting patiently for, now waited for me to approach. I can't say how I knew all of this. It's not like I could even recollect the first part of the story or the warnings that were issued to me. The only obsession of my thought-barren mind at that time was a psychic understanding formed from more than just a mystical bond. It was a culmination of every metaphysical intuition forgotten by the modern man, and some that not even the peoples of old had words for. Those energies took root in my fertile emotional state, creating a leash between the figure holding my attention captive, the peripherals swirling in unfocused doubts, and the vanishing points of this spirit prophetess directing all of my movements. That's when the slow results of my tactile senses finally made their way through the hypnosis-clogged pathways of my mind, alerting me to my stumbling feet beneath me, the bob of my vision, and my fanatic arms eager to hold the female entity and eager to be held. My auditory senses were second to penetrate the clouds covering my sense of self. It had called me by an angelic tune, slowing the beats of my heart, controlling the flow of blood, pulling on my tendons like strings to a consenting marionette. I was helpless but to answer, and I wanted to answer. Through thorny bushes, down dropping dirt patches, over rolling ditches, and away from the occasional gene-tearing coil of rusty barbed wire, I ran, pursuant of the face that called to me, more distinguishable the further I ran into the inky expanse of Nevada's night. Perception blurred, yet I felt warmer, more captivated, less worried, and happier. I was content for perhaps the first time in my life, and it was when I stood before a woman of perfect proportions, a caring smile, and tumultuous eyes of complex intent. She wore a loose-fitting black robe, covering nearly every inch of her skin, her hair undulating across her shoulders to flow down the sides of her body. She smiled and approached, her height growing with each step taken. The cloak billowed outward, her covered footfalls never once hinting at an oscillating action, giving the impression of a floating being. After what seemed an eternity captured in her gaze, I looked upward, her face inches above mine. The midpoints of her lower eyelid split downward, curving their corners back to reveal an iridescent gelatinous mixture of nerve ends sinuously covering threads of corded muscle, flexing the shape of perfect cheekbones. The more her skin rolled back to the profiles of her figure, the less her clear jelly felt the need to continue its confined human features. The muscle strands assembled themselves into a triangular mesh, pushing her face outward slightly while morphing the gel into a much larger hexagonal surface. When the skin coils stopped rolling at her neckline, and the hexagonal appendage formed roughly a foot in diameter, she raised her long palms upward, arms outstretched on either side of me. Cloak sleeves hung from pale, pulseless wrists. I was frozen, small kernels of disgust scratching their homes beneath the layers of oppressive mesmerisms, telling me I should welcome her message. Enthralled by intoxicating pheromones overwhelming my amygdala, hijacking my hypothalamus, the desire to see her as one I should protect at all costs sought to fill the wrinkles of my brain with unwavering commitment and an acceptance of her change in form as the exponential increase of her beauty. From her face's center, protrusions formed to glyphs, and their meaning flowed toward me, rotating as the symbols did, propagating away from their core like an outward vortex, portaling calm and impressing intent. Thunderclaps of pattern recognition sporadically echoed, head ricocheting rebounds to eventually mature words in their understanding. She said, "We explore all realms for higher consciousness. We take your form. We show you higher existence. We show you a higher calling. We give you a choice." I felt my body stipple in the numbing sensation of pins and needles, searing every pore across my body to the rhythm of her emanating face. I felt myself on the verge of a change that I had already said yes to, yet that kernel of disgust grew ever so slightly, with the prideful aspect of an ancient, unearned ego, finding the assertion of a choice in the midst of my sensory capture to be an insult to the precepts of my reality. I wanted to hold on to something, but in all honesty, there wasn't much other than my pride to remember. Brief flashes of my family, my car, and my copious drinking. That was all I knew, all I had to live for, and it hurt. The spirit, the prophetess, redoubled her efforts, bathing me in a wave of subservient energies and soothing coos. I felt loved and compelled to cry out, "Show me your higher consciousness." Tentatively, she responded, "Choose." My nagging sense of self refused, yet I wanted what she wanted, so I pleaded, "Show me, and then let me decide." A nervous pause ceased the transferal of energy, leaving me cold and more aware of the inhospitable environment covering me in an icy slick. Cautiously, while diligently applying the mental pavings of acceptance over my kernels of ego, she diverged her abilities elsewhere. Her hands, colder than the blizzard forming, gripped my shoulders. At their connection, my eyesight blackened. My sense of self dissolved, and I felt myself projected to a realm of incomprehensible existence. One in which knowledge was measured in the length of one's genetic code, where halls of wet musculature pumped with foreign fluids of every species scattered across infinity. It was a task that would never end. It was a cause most closely compared to religious importance from our realm. In this flitting of spirit through astral pathways, I comprehended a future of walking the damnable squelching of rippling halls, of prostrated servitude to the mutilations of my own form, till I joined the collective bio-knowledge of all progressively collected existence, a disembodied union of thoughts, sense, and patterns portrayed this opportunity as eternal enlightenment. Most of the thoughts I heard were garbled nonsense, but amongst them were some humans crawling their way to the forefront of my attention, pushing past the crowds of intrigued, interested, welcoming my added presence. Psychically, the human minds reached out, desperately pleading for me to join them. Their calls were panicked and rushed as though under a constant strain. In their tones, what I heard was a begging for more humanity to join them since they themselves could not leave. This realization at their Stockholm-esque reaches filled me with genuine fear. At the thought of survival, the basic human need to get away, to survive at all costs, my interface broke. My soul cometed back through the astral horizon to my physical presence on Earth. The blink of a microsecond somehow extending impossibly longer, I returned to a painfully ached chest. My blood pressure peaked to the irregular ticks of my heartbeat and rapid adrenaline-fueled tremors. The enormity of it all dragged my knees to rocky earth and broke my heaving mortal shackles into a stinking sweat. The Prophetess crouched beside me, ambivalent yet eager. I was so far beneath her, and the torpid shock of my weakened state gave her all the permission she needed to grasp my arms a second time, blinking us from existence to a more saturated oneness with the unending sea of voices. Comparatively, my previous experience was mercifully removed. My consciousness now barreled through an infinite maze of parting flesh. I was anonymous to the wider organism, but to the halls of stitched faces, I was a celebrity of novelty, for the passing amusement of omnipresent intents. I was a delicious delight to be torn at as I raced by. Amorphous hands and ephemeral claws deconstructed my identity to a single unknowable, forgettable element. In that deprivation of self, for the first and hopefully last time, I knew the most magnificent distillation of insanity. And insanity felt good. It was an electrifying everything, all the time experience, and when it became the base level of all existence, it was the minor attempts towards sanity that became the relief carvings of invigorated conversational sincerity between intelligences of maximal sensory baselines. I endured the flood of knowledge, the wealth of emotion, the impossible pressures threatening to shatter my ego. Yet in the mounting pressure, something surprising happened, prompting my expulsion from their realm like spat food on a floor. My ego didn't shatter, it hardened. Back through the passages of foreign stars, entities, and galaxies I fell, down into my prone body, gasping the powdery dirt my face laid against. My vision hazed with the dripping of copious streams of sweat, freezing my brow in the hospitable waste blanketing me. In this depleted state, my frantic mind tore outward, slicing, pushing the oppressive influences of the Prophetess away. I raised a hand and pleaded for her to stop. I held on to the notion of choice, the false promises of a sharp lure hoping to capture my soul. There had to be an end. I needed the all-consuming madness to cease. Her glyphs glowed darkly, her trap now revealed, its jaws fast approaching their conclusion. Her voice returned, more sultry, taunting, subversive. One final step and you'll become one with your new destiny. It will be a difficult adjustment, but the first to evolve of any species always face the most radical of pain. All it requires is one final jump across the horizon. How can you not accept? How can I not force your salvation upon you? In the crater of neurochemical imbalances came the unintentional excavation of a long-dormant instinct. She threatened my own being, so from it I grew more emboldened to fight her sociotropic sway. The kernel of disgust grew, initially feeding off of hatred for her existence. This aspect then exponentially surged once I indulged in hatred of myself. It was a pure wrath, shot inward to magnify dangerous energies building upon obvious evidence. For having considered the portal, for having found myself in this crumpled position, for all my life's misadventures leading to the precipice of complete and total loss. All I knew, all I felt, was the preservation of the self, the continuance of ego, no matter the cost. It was a vicious reset born of cynical, cyclical manifestations of pure hatred. The unassailable pride administered a medicinal toxin of monumental import, reinitializing my brain under one simple primordial decree: kill. This simple imperative, devoid of all reason, discard the nuanced appeals of the cosmic being before me. My tired body slowly raised itself, struggling to recollect the control of my heartbeat amidst the fire of adrenaline purging my veins. Finally, muscles tied as tautly as steel beams, breaths billowing aggressive bursts. I told the Prophetess everything she knew would come to pass by bearing my deadened gaze at its now glyphless face. It stepped back, so I swung an uppercut. It dodged my swing, then tried reaching out to me with the same psychic pleas, but not before I swung again, smacking some of the genetic cartilage from its face into the dark. I wouldn't acknowledge its scream. I couldn't if I wanted to. In all of its delicate manipulation, like a programmer making modifications to my psyche, through all of its tricks, through its overconfidence, it tripped something I didn't even know existed. I found myself as nothing more than bloodthirsty chimpanzee, recklessly expending every last ounce of burning fat to fuel the launching of my bone-jutting fists. With each connection of fist to form, I recognized it for what it was. Not a spirit, not an alien, not a metaphysical intelligence offering immortality, not a prophetess. It was a demon from hell that I would soon send back to the unending halls of webby membrane, pulsing intestines, merged faces, and reaching ligaments, all promising the deepest desires should I but only join them in damnable torment. After several hits, it leapt backward, its gel contracting and its skin uncurling, returning to the seamless incarnation of feminine beauty. It caused me to pause for a moment, responding in such powerful human fear. Knowing it for what it was, though, I broke through that final attempt to wrangle its hold over me. The distance it made and the time I gave was enough for it to vanish from existence, dissolving from this reality before I could reach it to continue my assault. At this, the anger I felt was untamable, unforgettable, and drained me of all emotional continence. For hours I wandered the dark of Round Mountain's valley, stalking an evil that no longer existed, becoming one with nature's unknown in my own nightly cycle, skirting that minuscule human settlement in the middle of it all. Upon realizing what I had become, I felt alone. It was in that lonesome feeling that I knew I had to return. A stall in the blizzard, and the dots of lights on the horizon guided my stiff, broken form back to the front of the long-closed bar. Along the street, I hobbled, becoming acutely aware of the pain in my legs and the numbness of my extremities. Thankfully, there was no lobby to explain myself to. Mine was the only car in the line of cheap cockroach-ridden rooms, and my key opened to the 2 single beds, a pay-per-view TV, and the glorious bathroom. All night I soaked in a tub the size of a child's coffin, incapable of sleep and seeking to vent the ever-churning recounting of my mind. I recorded my reflections on the hotel's pen and pad. Then, when the pad ran out, I used whatever surface was closest. At first, I broke the pen so I could smear ink on the tub wall, then the curtain, then the floor closest. Every surface within reach of my warm pool of incubating normality was scrawled with psychotic ramblings. None of it made sense, and from what did make sense, I felt a greater desire to forget. The next day, after driving about 100 miles, I stopped on the side of the highway and broke down crying. I cried till there was nothing but the dry heaves of irrationality passing out of me. I slept at his truck stop, then continued to drive in a frantic hurry to my parents in Texas, where I finally reached my home. My pale, emaciated appearance worried them. My father said I looked like a drug addict, but my mother was the one who suspected something deeper had occurred after noticing the salt-stained corners of my eyes. My brothers and sisters all commented much the same, each questioning my scars and torn clothes I hadn't thought to change out of. So I spun a quick tale of how a man with a knife chased me while I was at a rest stop, and I was able to make a quick getaway in my car, but the trauma of it all was still hanging over me. It was certainly more believable than the alternative, especially since the alternative meant spreading the story to my family. I'm still not sure how it all works, or if the interruption in my capture will result in the spreading of the story's contagion. I didn't know if its existence was just confined to Round Mountain, so I guess I'm telling it to all of you in the hopes that by laying it all out, I'll feel relief like Jack did. Maybe by telling it to more than one person, it doesn't have the same luring effect it had on me, and it'll be a warning to you and your listeners of the danger spreading from the valley of Round Mountain, Nevada. Now that I write it out, it doesn't feel as good as I hoped. I don't know. I guess I still need to clear my head somehow. There's a bar near here. I'm sure after a couple of drinks and some conversation, I'll feel a lot better. Dear listener, within all of us exists a soul unique to us. If we feed it purpose, it will grow in consciousness, but if we starve it of passion, direction, intentional endeavors, then we risk drifting into the realms of stories that can possess and lead us astray. So this night, please ponder your purpose, recollect your resolve, and pass through, hopefully unscathed, your next encounter with the metaphysical, your next visit to Croatoan County. And if a man seems overly eager to tell you a story, think twice before listening.